important than weapons. Except for violence, all arguments should be used to combat globalization. As always, ideas rushed like a bubbling stream from Fidel. Stieglitz and I listened in fascination. He had an all-encompassing vision of globalization, its consequences, and ways of confronting them. His arguments, of a great modernity and cleverness, made patent those qualities that many biographers have noted in him: his sense of strategy, his ability to read a concrete situation, and his quickness at analysis. To all that was added experience accumulated over so many years of governing, resistance, and combat. As I listened to him, it struck me as unfair that the newer generations knew so little about his life and career, and that, as unconscious victims of constant anti-Castro propaganda, so many of those in Europe who were committed to the alternative globalization movement, especially the young people, considered him a relic of the Cold War, a leader left over from a stage of modern history that had now passed, a man who had little to contribute to the struggles of the 21st century. Even today, and even in the inner circles of the left, many people criticize, distrust, even outright oppose the Castro regime in Havana. And though throughout Latin America the Cuban Revolution continues to inspire enthusiasm among leftist social movements and many intellectuals, in Europe it is the subject of controversy. It is increasingly difficult, in fact, to find anyone for or against the Cuban Revolution who, asked to sum up Castro and his years in power, can give a serene, dispassionate opinion. I had just published a short book of conversations with Subcomandante Marcos, the romantic, galactic leader of the Zapatistas in Mexico. Fidel had read it and found it interesting. I suggested that he and I do something similar, but on a larger scale. He has never written his memoirs, and it's almost certain that for lack of time he never will. What I proposed would be, then, a kind of autobiography à deux, though in the form of a conversation. It would be Fidel Castro's political testament, an oral summing up of Fidel Castro's life by Fidel himself at almost 80, and more than half a century after the attack on the Moncado barracks in Santiago de Cuba in 1953, the moment when, to some degree, his public life began. Few men have known the glory of entering the pages of both history and legend while they are still alive. Fidel is one of them. He is the last sacred giant of international politics. He belongs to the generation of mythical insurgents: Nelson Mandela, Ho Chi Minh, Patrice Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral, Che Guevara, Carlos Marighella, Camilo Torres, Mehdi Ben Barka, who, pursuing an ideal of justice, threw themselves into political action in the years following the Second World War. These were men who hoped to change a world of inequalities and discrimination, a world polarized by the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. Like thousands of progressives and intellectuals around the world, among them the most brilliant of men and women, that generation honestly thought that communism promised a bright and shining future, and that injustice, racism, and poverty could be wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of just decades. At that time, in Vietnam, Algeria, Guinea-Bissau, over half the planet, the oppressed peoples of the earth rose up. Most of humanity was still, back then, subject to the infamy of colonization. Almost all of Africa and much of Asia were still under the domination, under the thumb of the old Western colonial powers. Meanwhile, the nations of Latin America, theoretically independent for 150 years, were being exploited by privileged minorities and often subjugated by cruel dictators: Batista in Cuba, Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, Duvalier in Haiti, Somoza in Nicaragua, Ydígoras in Guatemala, Pérez Jiménez in Venezuela, Stroessner in Paraguay, who were installed as leaders and supported by Washington. Fidel